All right, so the big topic seems to be, is this real or not?
I see.
I don't think so. Mike from the other class said it to me. I'm like, we'll throw it in here. So, all right, so welcome to 310, and here we go, right? After today, we only have 19 days left. All right.
Don't scare me.
Okay, talked about your reading. Be very helpful if you actually read this stuff, so you're kind of up to speed on what's happening. I did throw some optional reading in here, but if you don't have that book, don't worry about it. It is an expensive book, but it's a pretty good book. Let's see, have your Q&A quizzes like always. So we're going to be working on the Lycoming O290D, and as we're going to get into with our notes, the O means it is a horizontal, it is an opposed engine, meaning the pistons go this way. Also called a boxer engine. You don't have to write any of this down yet. Most of our modern day aircraft engines are of the boxer type. We just call them opposed. 290 stands for how many cubic inch displacement it is. It's 290 cubic inch, and the D is the model. The type certificate data sheet. So aircraft engines and propellers have type certificate data sheets, which talks about their certificateness. And on the type certificate, it will tell you these various things. It will tell us like there's the dash D, the D2, the D2A, the D2B, and the D2C of the snapshot that I took. But we have the D, so we can look right there. It has a FA type certificate number was 299. We can see out there, E229, sorry. Takeoff horsepower is 130 horsepower at 2,800 RPM, which is a little higher than most. Rated horsepower, which is its normal horsepower, would be 125 RPM at 2,600. So this is a little unusual. Like my airplane doesn't have this. It just has max horsepower and max RPM. Just there it is, and manifold pressure. This one has a rated horsepower, which at some point is probably going to give us how long you can keep it at the 2,800 RPM and have to back it down to its normal rated 100%. So that'd be like a little over 100% horsepower. So normal horsepower would be normal horsepower 125 at 2,600 RPM. It's bore. The bore, how big around? That is the diameter of the cylinder. So bore is diameter, but we don't say diameter because then everybody else would know what we're talking about. So we say bore is 4.875 inches. And the stroke, that is how far that piston goes up and back down, is 3.875 inches. So cubic inch displacement, like I said, should be right about 290 at exactly 289, rounded up to 290. Has a compression ratio, we'll talk a lot about that, of 6.5 to 1 with a propeller drive ratio of 1 to 1, which means every time the crankshaft goes around, the propeller goes around the same, which is a good thing since the propeller is bolted to the crankshaft. So, yes.
Will we talk about differences in under square, over square pistons?
It's not a piston thing, it's an operation thing.
Oh.
Yes. All right, so propeller-driven rotation when viewed from the rear. Now, that is an interesting thing. So when we talk about engines and right and left of engines, we want to be careful about using the term pilot view because some engines are going to face the in front of the pilot and some are going to be behind the pilot. So if you're always going to reference an engine with, well, from pilot view, well, then what happens if it's a pusher and the engine's behind the pilot? Does that mean when the pilot's looking this way, that's the right? Because the engine is now turned around backwards. There's a pilot supposed to turn around. So we don't say pilot view. It's when standing behind the engine is one thing, how things are referenced for engines for the most part. So viewed from the rear when standing behind it. Firing order is 1324. All four-cylinder engines are 1324. Spark occurs at 25 degrees before top dead center. Notice that it's part of its type design. You don't change these things. You change that, you've changed the type design. So if we remember back to 309, the definition of airworthy is something that meets its type design or properly altered condition and is a condition for safe flight. Well, so if I decide that I want to get a little more power out of this engine, so I bump my spark advance and I have it advance earlier, which I think that'd be more like 18. I go, oh, if this could take 18, I'll go 18 degrees. Does that meet its type design? No, so you can't do that. It's got to be 25. 25 plus or minus what? Doesn't say plus or minus. It says So what's it supposed to be? 25. All right. Valve rocker clearance, hydraulic tappets collapse. That's dry tappet clearance over here. So the D2, the D2A give me a dry tappet clearance. That probably doesn't mean anything to you right now, but it will eventually. And the D doesn't have that number. It's because these over here have hydraulic tappets. They're very different. And this one down here has solid tappets. And we'll talk all about that coming up here. But that is the engine you are working with. Let's see. That particular engine has a TBO, which stands for time between overhauls. So the manufacturer has to give us how long between the engine is overhauled until when it must be done again. And it is shockingly every 12 years or 2,000 hours for the D and 1,500 hours for the D2.
Which is a long time.
Every 12 years. Now you consider that, oh shoot, like what's a 290? The 290s are kind of an antique. Like a 320, I haven't priced them lately, but I'm just going to guess off the top of my head. If you called up Lycoming and said, hey, can you give me a price on a 320, which is the next size up, not only would it be probably a 6 month to a year or more wait time, they're going to tell you some number like $50,000. So could you imagine if you had to pay $50,000 for that engine if you used it or not every 12 years? But it is the service instruction 1009 Alpha Yankee says every 12 years or 2,000 hours. Now, if you're flying Part 91, if you remember Part 91 is just me, people out for fun, not for hire, we do not have to comply with this. So we tend to do things on condition. My engine was last overhauled in 97, which when I bought it, it was like, well, it wasn't that long ago, but yeah, that was 25 years ago. So, but I only have 400 hours or so on my engine. So, yeah.
So I've heard about, like, for experimental, would you do conditioning inspections instead of annual inspections is what they call it?
Yes, aircraft, certified aircraft annual inspections, experimental have condition inspection. So same scope and detail. But anyway, back to this. So if you're Part 91, which is just your general people, not for hire, we can throw this out the window and go on condition. Which is to say that if I could get this engine up to 4,000 hours and it's operating beautifully, I can do that. But at the same time, if it's running like crap and burning oil and not working well, making metal at 500, you can't say, well, yeah, but it says 2,000. I get to keep going, right? So it's always on, no matter what, it's on condition. And then for some people, charters, for hire, stuff like that, they're bound by this. So you get to 2,000, 12 years, that engine's coming off. All right, the differences between the models, in case you're interested, we have the D that has solid tappets and a hydraulic control, although ours don't. It just had the option. The 290-11 is the same as the 290D, but now you can see the D2, D2A, D2 Bravo, D2 Charlie. Takeoff RPMs are all the same. Horsepower is different. Fuel, they all take 80 octane minimum. Compression ratios are a little bit different, and you can see these have hydraulic tappets, same as D2, which means hydraulic tappets, hydraulic. So these down here have hydraulic, and these up here have solid. So there's your big difference. The 290s were used as ground power units, a lot of them. Ground power unit would be some sort of cart that ran a generator to start aircraft. So that would be a non-FAA certificated engine produced by Lycoming 0290G Golf. And there is a service instruction by Lycoming that tells you how to take that Golf engine and turn it into a D. So you saw, it's an expensive kind of rare engine, really. Parts for it are not that readily available. It's almost the same size as a 320, which is kind of like a Chevy 350. It's like, man, there are a lot of them. So a lot of people prefer the 320. Maybe that's why we have the 290s here. All right. This reminds me to talk about acceptable data. So we're all aircraft mechanics working in an engine shop for the next 4 weeks, and we're tasked with overhauling. And 0290, and so we have to have proper manuals. What do proper manuals consist of? And in this class, we're going to talk really more about engines. So what is a proper engine manual? Manufacturer's engine overhaul manual. Well, as I mentioned earlier, Continental tends to make a book for each specific engine. I want to work on Continental 0200. There's a Continental, I think it's C85, C90, and 0200 manual. It's thin. And then I want to work on a 470. Well, now you got the Continental 0470 manual. The 520 manual, even though the 470 and 520 engines look exactly the same, it's got its own manual. So they have a very thick manual, and they make one for every engine. And then Continental did something that's, to me, rather obnoxious. They still have service bulletins, and they had a lot of service bulletins. And somebody got the idea to take all the service bulletins, rip them out, and put them in a book, and they call it the M0 manual. And so at one point, as an engine mechanic, you'd know, oh, that's just service bulletin M74-5, and you go right to it. Now it's like, well, dang, it's in the M0 manual, and I don't know where the hell that is in the M0 manual. You got to relearn everything and page numbers. Lycoming that we're working on has a very thin, I didn't bring it with me in here, very thin manual for our engines called the Lycoming Direct Drive Engine Manual, which really covers any engine that is a direct drive, meaning the propeller mounts to the crankshaft. And then they'll make another one for vertical engines that sit vertically that would go into helicopter. Not all helicopter engines are vertical stacked. Some are horizontal. They make another one for the vertical. They make another one for the 8-cylinder engine. They make another one for what they call the integral crank or integral accessory case, or the -7. They actually have in parentheses 76 series. We'll talk about that. They're kind of a weird engine, but they made their own manual. Other than that, it's a thin manual that says right in the front, this manual must be used in conjunction with service bulletins, letters, and service bulletins, instructions, and letters. So what if you go to Lycoming and you pay the money, $75, $100, whatever it is, and you buy a brand new Lycoming manual? Are you in compliance?
No.
You're not, because you don't have all the service bulletins. Well, Lycoming does provide service bulletins on their website. They're pretty good about that. If you know what you're looking for, you can find it rather easily. So kind of takes care of that. Excuse me. What about 4313, which is called what? Acceptable methods, practices, and techniques. Is that approved data?
No.
It is not. It's a tricky little thing. Somebody could argue that it is. When would 4313 be approved data?
Anywhere.
You get all the way to 4313 with nothing, and then you go back and look because there is something.
If you're an A&P, it's always going to be acceptable data at best. If you're an IA, then it can be approved data. So as an IA, I can use 4313 to approve return to service at 337. So as an IA, I can use it as approved data. But the point I want to get to that is most important, this is 4313 right here, Chapter 8, Engines, Fuel, Exhaust, and Propellers. General statement, consult the manufacturer's manual, service bulletins, and instruction books regarding the repair and overhaul, inspection, installation, and maintenance of aircraft engines for that particular make, model, and type of engine. This section lists acceptable inspection repair procedures that may be used in the absence of an engine manufacturer's maintenance manual. So when could you use Chapter 8 of 4313?
There's absolutely nothing else.
Only if the manufacturer is 100% silent on the subject. And I'm not aware of anything in here that the manufacturer has not talked about. So I don't think this is really going to be too applicable to us, especially maybe radial engines or something like that. So, all right, next. Thank you for asking. My favorite subject.
It doesn't look that
That's
bad.
your wallpaper too, isn't it?
Yes. All right, so let me think. What do we got here? Notes that I wrote down. Let's see. Time cards, yes. So you have syllabus. You read that. Use of You, at least you said you did. Canvas, everybody is pretty much familiar with. It might be new to you, but you picked it up like real quick, I noticed. Time cards, remember, if you forget to log in or log out, don't come to us after 24 hours because I'll be like, I don't remember. And you guys are terrible at this. Don't make 2 mistakes. If you make 1, leave it at 1. Don't make 2. I clocked in the wrong spot. Then I tried clocking it again. It's just, all right, just bring me your card. All right, so across the street, what is an A quality project going to look like? Highest standards. You're paying attention to what you're doing and you're doing good work. I think you know what highest standards are. Using the book appropriately. You're following along. You're talking about what the book says and asking good questions. Parts are well cared for. I don't have to keep coming around and saying, why did you put this Conrad cap on top of this bearing, right? So everything's well cared for. It's not rusting. It's not banging into something else. No under or over torques, please. If you do make a mistake and over torque something, you need to fess up to it immediately and say, what do you want me to do? Because some bolts will then break. So, that happens. It does happen. And the thing is, you got to say something about it. Hey, I just over torqued this crankshaft gear bolt will be the big one. So please don't under over torque. Good corrosion prevention. You're not leaving parts in the hot seat washer till tomorrow. You follow directions well. Engine looks like a quality overhaul. Take pride in your work. Remember, engine overhauls are very, very expensive. When I was doing them, and it was a long time ago, we were average overhaul for a 4-cylinder engine was over $20,000. It's a lot of money for somebody, and that was 20 years ago. So now you're talking $50, $60, $100,000 for these engines. So you want to treat them like that. Let's see. Yeah, above and beyond just a get it done project, because you're going to run it. And right now it's hard for you to picture it, but you're going to be standing there in that test cell, this thing running at 2,400 RPM, making a whole lot of noise trying to, did I remember to tighten that one bolt? Because if you didn't, it's coming apart. And of course, good use of time. The good news is almost everybody usually passes this class because you're in groups of 4, and if everybody works together, you get it done. Make sure you good cleanliness. It's going to get a little dirty as you're taking it apart. Now, I'll be honest. The way I worked in my engine shop, there were times you'd come in and go, "Oh my God!" And then a minute ago it was like terrible. I work and tools get piled up, and then I always, like every hour I would stop, put all the tools away, inventory, okay, move on to the next thing. So, yeah, my, cleanliness went like that. Proper use of manuals. Like I said, make sure that you're using the manuals. Even though I wrote the stuff, I want you to look it up in the manual and read it, and then do it and follow along. The light combing manual contradicts itself with its service bulletins. You can literally read a service manual and it'll tell you exactly to do this, and then I reference a service bulletin and you go, those two things say to do different things. So it's like, which one do I want? I tend to use the service bulletins as the highest level and the manual a level down. So if there's ever a contradiction between the manual and the service bulletin, I always default to the service bulletin. Why? Because the manual was written in 1974 with some updates, but light combing seems to be about that fast to update a service bulletin. They're all electronic. They just boom, rewrite it, and there it is. So they're usually more up to date. Let's see. Yeah, keep things orderly. Again, protect your parts. I think I wrote that twice. There's a lot of non-reusable parts that we're going to be reusing. I regret that, but I'll talk about that and remind you, we wouldn't like gaskets, washers, lock washers. We'd not reuse those things. All right, we talked about the light combing 0290. Since this picture is up here, I actually took this photograph in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, I believe is where I was. What kind of engine is that? How do you say that? They do not say that back in there. Light coming is how they pronounce it. Light coming. So when you get back there, they're like, say what now? This is a light combing IO 540. It's an I, which means, and we'll write all this down a bit. I meaning it is fuel injected. It is an O, meaning it is opposed. It has 6 cylinders. I just happen to know that it's 540 cubic inches because I knew that. This is a angle valve type. Lycoming has 2 versions of the 540s. They're parallel valve. You have a parallel valve 290. It takes 1 rocker shaft that goes through, and the rocker arms are parallel. This has angle heads, so it takes 2 rocker shafts, and they're much shorter, and the valves and everything are angled. So it's angled. This has a constant speed propeller. Propeller changes pitch off the governor up here. There's the prop governor right there. All aircraft engines have dual spark plugs for redundancy, which means they have 2 magnetos. There's a magneto here. There's one on the opposite side. So each running independently. Fuel pump down here because it is fuel injection. This has what's called a dynafocal mount. There are really 2 types of mounts in aviation. There's the straight mount, which would just come out straight, 4 corners straight. And then the dynafocal, which you can see it has 4 ears, 1 here, 1 over there, 1 down here. And they're all kind of canted forward and in. And if you were to take a rod right there and put a rod that size through each one of them and brought them to a point, it would have to be an imaginary point because it would hit the case, it would come to a spot right about in the middle, right in the middle of the center of gravity for that engine. So that's a dynafocal mount versus a straight mount.
Pros and cons to that, just more
Oh, dynafocal's way better. Way better. Takes out better vibration. They're hard to get the bolts in because the bolts are all crooked. Yeah. Continental does not use that. Continental, so this takes a mount that you can have to picture it from the back. Continental tends to use more of a bed mount where it has rails that'll run forward and the engine will sit on top of those rails. So Lycoming. All right, get into our notes here. All right, so here we go. Warm up your hands. Start with the notes. We are going to start talking about the basic theory of engines before we get into specifics. Basic theory. So a reciprocating engine Well, first of all, what does reciprocating mean? Back and forth. What's going back and forth? The piston. So that's a reciprocating engine, has a piston going back and forth. So a reciprocating engine, also called a recip, reciprocating engine is known as a heat engine. I don't call them that, but textbook does, and then after this we won't call it that anymore. Why is it called a heat engine? It produces heat. Yeah, that it does. But it's not what it's supposed to be producing, because it utilizes heat. Heat from what?
the combustion.
From fuel to produce power. So it uses heat to expand gases. And create pressure on a piston in a cylinder. I suppose once upon a time when I was a pretty young guy, I would think about, if you've ever played with gasoline does what? Explodes. So you think, oh, well, it's just explosions inside of cylinders. But it is not. That is called detonation, and that is very, very bad. And detonation can destroy an aircraft engine in a matter of seconds, literally seconds. It doesn't have to be, but it can. So we'll get a lot more into fuel in our next class sessions, the next class. But the fuel is supposed to be a controlled burn with expansion. So the fuel burns under control. It's not an explosion. So it's a nice burn that it burns, it creates heat, it expands and creates heat, and the hot gases and expansion will then gently push on the piston. Rather than if it's an explosion, it would be a big whack on the piston. And that's called detonation or pinging in a car. And pinging and detonation is extremely bad in an aircraft. Well, it's bad in all engines. The big difference is your car has a knock sensor in it that will tell the computer that it's detonating, and it'll back off on the timing. In an aircraft engine, there is nothing to tell us that's happening because the propeller's too noisy and the engines are too noisy. So when it detonates, unless you have some sort of engine monitor system that you're seeing your EGTs, CHTs start running away, you're not going to know it. And seconds later, you're going to melt through a piston, and then you'll know it. So they tell you, I guess. So how do you know if it detonated? Don't worry about it, I'll tell you. All right, so yes.
So is the name, like, it sometimes they call ICE internal combustion engines? Is the combustion portion kind of misleading in terms of that?
No, it's combustion. Combustion means burn.
Okay.
Like you have an internal combustion engine. These are internal combustion engines.
Okay.
It's enclosed. We have external combustion engines. What's an external combustion engine?
Jet.
No, I'd still say that's internal.
Steam engine.
What?
Steam.
Steam engine. Yeah. So steam engines. You have guys with coal. You can throw the coal in there. You can see the fire, right? It's external. It's in a firebox, but that's the idea between internal and external. So reciprocating. Let's see. So we know that it's a reciprocating. So turns. The piston turns, I should say, well, the piston doesn't, the crankshaft does, turns reciprocating, R-E-C-I-P, reciprocating, which is back and forth. And we're going to look at a couple of engines, internal combustion engines, that are thrown into the reciprocating category that don't have any reciprocating parts. You'll have to pick it out. Go, hey, that's the one you mentioned. Okay, let's see. Turn back and forth into rotary motion. Into rotary motion. So what do we have? We have a piston inside of the cylinder that is reciprocating back and forth, connected to a connecting rod that goes to a crankshaft that turns the reciprocating motion into a rotary motion. Let's just jump ahead to something real quick here. There we go. I wanted that. So this is a very simplistic version of a reciprocating engine. There we go. And as I mentioned, we have what goes up and down? Okay, so it's going to go up and down now, but for us it goes back and forth and horizontally opposed, but, up, down, this way, that way. All right, yeah. All right, so piston is reciprocating. Piston is attached to what? A connecting rod. A connecting rod called a conrod. For those of us, save time, see world. Conrod, which is then connected to the green part, which is a crankshaft with a throw up here. And we'll get into this later. I just want everybody to have a good overview of what we're talking about. It has an offset throw. So it turns the reciprocating motion into rotary motion. All right, so since we're on this, we'll just kind of take a look at, and again, I'll write this down a little bit later here. There are 4 strokes and 5 events to most engines. So almost all the engines are 4-stroke engines. There are 2-stroke engines. We'll talk about those. There are not a lot of 2-stroke engines in the world anymore, or I shouldn't say the world, in the United States. The government doesn't like them. They've tried to remove them they definitely are not allowed on the street anymore in motorcycles. You can get them off-road, but they're limited. And only a couple of aircraft have a Rotax 2-stroke. So everything else is pretty much 4-stroke. So 4 strokes, 5 events. A stroke means up and down. So it goes, an up is a stroke, a down is a stroke, right? So it's going to do it 4 times to complete the cycle, and 5 things will happen. So if we get it at the beginning, you had a question over there? All right. So the easiest place to start with is at the beginning. So we have it all the way at the top. Now, the top has a special name if it's top. And that is called top dead center. And what top dead center means is that the connecting rod is perfectly in line with the crankshaft, which is everything is perfectly straight up and down. So if you were to push on this thing, it would neither go one way or the other. All the force would be going straight down through it. That is top dead center. And then there's the opposite all the way at the bottom called bottom dead center. Now, if I move this crankshaft, and just because of the way the frames are, I can't move it much, but there. Moved that. Now, the piston is almost at the top. If I moved it, it could be at the top, but the connecting rod may not exactly be in line. So you can be at the top, but not top dead center. It's a very specific part there. So, all right, so starting at the very top here, top dead center, we have valves right here. Here is an intake valve off to the left and an exhaust valve to the right. The intake is missing pieces, just because of the drawing. It should have, here's a cam shaft with a push rod onto a rocker arm onto a valve, and there are springs that hold the valves up, and the push rod and rocker arm push down. So we go a little bit, so it's going to come down. The intake opens. So the first stroke is intake, and a push rod would push that open and everything. So intake, that's stroke 1. Intake. Stroke 2 is valves closed, compression. Then we have ignition. Boom, spark right there. That's an event. So there's 5 events. That's one of the events. So intake, compression, ignition, power. So we have the power stroke. What's it doing here? Intake, compression, ignition, power, exhaust. So intake, compression, power, exhaust. 4 strokes, 5 events. Intake, compression, ignition, power, exhaust. So 4-stroke engine, 5 events. We'll come back and circle around this some more, but I want everybody to kind of feel like I don't want to get ahead of everybody. It's like, wait, what is he talking about? 4 strokes and intakes and exhausts and all that kind of stuff. So, all right. This one. All right, there we go. All right, there are several different types of recip engines. So B reciprocating engines. Okay, B, C. We have several types of recip engines. Well, first type, you opposed. Horizontally opposed, to be more accurate. Like I said, often called a boxer engine. What kind of cars have boxer engines in them these days?
Subaru.
Porsche and Subaru and Volkswagen.
You just said Volkswagen twice.
I did. Thank you for that. Actually, that would have been great. I said Volkswagen. Okay, opposed, which was this one right here, horizontally opposed. So they will come in your legacy engine, most all engines. So when I say legacy engines, I mean Continental and Lycoming. There's also a Franklin. They don't make engines anymore. So there's that one. Can't think of any other horizontal ones opposed. Now we have Rotax, but Rotax also does horizontally opposed. So horizontally opposed, they'll either come in 2 or 4 cylinders, or I'm sorry. No, I didn't mean that at all. They'll either come in 4 cylinders, 6 cylinders, and Lycoming does have an 8-cylinder that I've never even seen, the 720.
Doesn't exist. It's all in your head.
Yes. We have radial engines. Radial. So radials come in maybe a 3, never seen one, 5, 7, or 9 cylinders. And then they get into twin row. So then you have 5, 7, 9, or 18. Oh, you at it? What's that?
Damn.
Yeah.
18 cylinders.
5, 7, 9, 18, and add another 9 to that, another 9 to that, and it just keeps going in rows of 9. So we'll talk more about that. So we got
18
the
per row, you're saying?
9.
No.
9.
No, you're saying because, yeah, it's an odd
9. Yeah, see, 9, 9. But they have odd numbers. And they're odd numbers because they fire every other one, and they go in the direction of rotations. If we look at this propeller, we can see that it's going to go to our left because it's a right-hand rotating engine. You go stand from the back of the engine, so that's why most engines go from the right. So you start at the top with a radial engine. This would be the number 1 cylinder. This is number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 9 cylinders. So the firing order is 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 2, 4, 6, 8, 1. So if it was an even number of cylinders, it would go 1,
2.
1, 3, 5, 7, now 1. Maybe I always skip one. So, and it goes in the direction of rotation. I hope that I'll write this down at one point. There is a Q&A question. Yeah, I will write it down later, but I'll tell you right now. What cylinder is getting ready to fire on this engine? It's real easy. It's either the number 3 or the number 8.
That's in line with that one.
It's in line with the propeller. Because their Q&A question, it's something about you just did the number 1 was on top dead center, and you rotate the propeller through like so many degrees, and then how come the number 3 cylinder isn't ready to fire? Well, it's because you biased it up and went way around. So,
Is it always that way? They line the prop up with that in the radials?
Mhm.
Is there a reason for that?
I don't know.
It's just
It's
because?
just the way it is. It's what I've noticed. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's everyone I've worked on is that way. All right.
There's some history of radials where you can lose 2 pistons and they'll still run.
They're robust as hell. Okay, so we have the radial. We have inline engines. So this is an inverted 6-cylinder, but they're in line, all in line, one behind the other. We have the V, makes the shape of a V. Allison's something, I forget the horsepower on that one. So that, thank you, 1710, so that's Allison. And then there's the W, as though it's a Bugatti. I think that's just a V-type, Rolls-Royce V-type, pretty. Then the W, so 1, 2, 3, 4 banks, so kind of sort of a, I don't know, W. That'll be our gang sign. Yeah. What's that? I'm not even sure. I didn't even write. I wrote it's an Allison V3420.
Okay, Allison, okay.
And then we have something that I didn't write down. Maybe it's in here. The rotary. So
That's the word.
now we have to be careful when you use the term rotary, and I tried to, like I said, I sort of shortened. I took some things out, so maybe I forgot some things. So there's the Wankel rotary, not wanker, but Wankel. This is a different thing. So a Wankel rotary is what they used in Mazdas, and it had a
It's like the Mazda RX-3, right?
In the RX-7.
They use that?
Those Apex seals are.
here, the Wankel rotary, and so it used a. So here's your. Do you see any recip? There's no recip going on there. If you ask me. So, but yes, that's the Wankel rotary. Not to be confused with. Okay, so I'll slow this down. You can actually see what's happening here. So these are really smooth engines. Their bad part was there had to be a seal right here at the apex of the triangle, and those seals would go out. But you can see that things are all happening at the same time. So here's intake happening over here, as power is happening over here, as exhaust is happening over here.
Oil consumption.
So yeah, so they were kind of cool engines. Okay, not to be confused with the gnome type rotary. It shouldn't be gnome rotary, it's just rotary. So they call these Wankels rotary engines, the Mazda rotary engine, but we have the rotary engine for us, which we will talk more about. They're very bizarre. They're basically a radial engine where the cylinders went around and you bolted the... And
That's
the,
like World War One, though.
it is World War I stuff.
Yeah.
And so the crankcase and cylinders run around, and you bolt the crankcase. I'm sorry, you bolt the propeller to the crankcase, and you bolt the crankshaft to the aircraft. And so these things would go around like that. And it kind of hurts your head, but if I slow it way down, you'll kind of see that. Follow one piston. It does in fact go down.
The whole freaking engine removed? That's insane.
Yeah. And then
Kinda
that, so we're bottom center. Now we're coming up on top dead center. So we'll talk about that. But so I try to distinguish the two between, I'll say, gnome rotary, which who made this one was gnome. There's some other manufacturers of it, so it's probably not proper to say gnome rotary and only give credit to one. But it's to distinguish me from talking about the Wankel rotary engine. So.
Hey, look, we give Edison credit for so many things. Might as well give the gnomes credit.
Right.
The valves are in the piston.
They are, yeah. They're very,
Very interesting.
very bizarre. Okay. Oops, I didn't want any of that, so I want to go to here. So, all right. So we had opposed type, which we had radial engines. Which always, if it's odd number per row. We had the inline engines. Inline. We had the V type. We had the W. And we talked about the Wankel rotary.
Should we mention the gnome as well?
That's kind of a radial, really. But sure, you can put that. Is it G-N-O-M-B, radial? Rotary.
And the W engine is just two banks of V.
They are. All right, theory of operation. For the Otto four-stroke. Which was invented by
Otto.
Professor Four-stroke.
Albert von Stroke. Nicholas August Otto invented it in 1876. And for you who are new to the class, that is not a test question. I would never ask something like that, and I'm being quite serious. It's not important to me when it was invented. It's not a history class. All right.
So what's the four-stroke? Make the idea to make four-strokes engine?
What's that?
Do you have like 4 strokes or something and have the idea to make a 4-stroke engine?
I'm sure he had a lot more than 4 strokes.
All right. So a stroke. A stroke is the distance
Oh my god. Don't say it.
a piston travels. What was I not supposed to say? Distance a piston travels through the cylinder yeah, good enough. So by the way, somebody asked me what my New Year's resolution was. I said, I think I'm going to use finger quotes inappropriately. Like it's completely odd in random places.
It's like, what do you call it? Just say no pun intended at random times. Now people got to think about
Oh
what
yeah,
you're saying.
same thing.
Well, actually,
It's like you should pay attention. I mean you. All right.
I used that the WTF on my
Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
LOL, lots of love. Sorry your grandma died, LOL. Right, good. For each stroke, the crankshaft, this is going to be important. The crankshaft travels 180 degrees. How much is 180 degrees?
Half a rotation.
Halfway around. So if we start with the crankshaft right here, and then the piston will be on top dead center, and it comes around 180 degrees all the way to the bottom, the piston will be at? I was going to do the piston this way, and that won't work, so it'll be halfway. So if the crankshaft is here, the piston's going to be
There.
halfway, and it's going to go around and come back to halfway. So got to think about that one. So for each stroke, the crankshaft travels 180 degrees. Well, how many strokes do we have to make the 5 events happen? 4 strokes. So how far does the crankshaft have to travel?
Two rotations.
2 complete turns. So here to here is 180. It did 1 stroke. From here to here, that's 360. It did. So it's halfway done. Got to go around again. You got stroke number 3 and one more time. So that's 4 180s. So therefore the crankshaft rotates 720 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 cycle. Well, that's fine, 1 cycle for 1 piston. What if I have 2 cylinders? Now how far does the crankshaft have to go around for all of those things to happen?
Same thing.
720. All right. What if I have 4 cylinders? Now how many times do I have to go around? What if I have a radial engine with 9 cylinders?
I don't know. Same thing.
720. So when an engine has gone around twice, everything has done its job 1 time. So if I had 100 cylinders, how many times does the crankshaft have to go around to fire them all? 720. Twice. Goes around twice, it'll fire all 100 cylinders. So no magic number there. It just goes around twice. Everything fires in that 1 time. So when the piston is all the way up, all the way up with the connecting rod and crankshaft throw, that's the offset part, in line, it is called top dead center, or TDC. When the piston is all the way down, it is called bottom dead center. And speaking of dead, guess what just died? My mouse. Oh, it's a break time anyway. All right. Well, I have no idea how to stop this, so just unplug it from the wall.
So don't say anything.